Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to Cases. Raef Badawi, founder of the Free Saudi Liberals website, was sentenced to 600 lashes and 7 years in prison for speaking ill of Saudi Arabia's religious police, and most puzzling of all, he was arrested for parental disobedience. Human Rights Watch urged Saudi authorities to release Badawi after he was initially charged with infringing on religious values under the Saudi 2007 anti-cyber crime law. Saudi Arabia has been criticized for conducting unfair trials against opposition leaders as well as human rights activists. In June, Human Rights Watch urged the EU's High Representative and other EU member states' representatives to condemn Saudi Arabia for convicting 7 governmental critics of inciting protest through Facebook. Other international human rights groups sent a letter to the Saudi Ministry of Justice seeking to observe the trials of 4 rights activists who faced charges of defaming the country's reputation, supporting international human rights groups, and sparking demonstrations against the government. HRW has also revealed that the number of capital punishment cases in the country has nearly tripled since 2010. Why is the kingdom that claims it supports the call for democracy in the Arab world repressing local human rights activists? This question and more will be answered in today's episode with Mr. Nizar Saghiyeh, a Lebanese lawyer and human rights activist and the founder of Legal Agenda, in our studio, and through Skype with Mr. Sevag Keshishian, the KSA researcher at Amnesty International. Before starting our episode, we will take a look at this report and be right back.
International human rights organizations issued reports concerning the dire human rights conditions in Saudi Arabia. The reports revolved around repression of dissent, discrimination against political and civil activists, torture, and other rights violations. Nevertheless, the latest case to be documented in the record of human rights violation is that of Raef Badawi. Mr. Badawi is a Saudi blogger and the creator of the website Free Saudi Liberals. He has been arrested in 2012 for allegation of insulting Islam through electronic channels and was also cited for apostasy. A year after his detention, the court's ruling came contrary to Badawi's wishes. He was seen guilty and hence sentenced to 7 years in jail and 600 lashes, the verdict said. The Saudi judicial system claimed that Mr. Badawi criticized senior religious figures, including the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. Following the judgment, Raif's wife made a statement to CNN saying, "I do not know what to do as I am devastated that my husband has been sentenced to 7 years in Saudi Arabia jails." Twitter became the scene of the launch of various tweets that either attack or defend the judgment. A Twitter user ironically commented on the verdict saying, 7 years of jail sentence and the Islamic religious leader Fayhan al-Ghamidi, who raped and killed his daughter, has not been arrested nor prosecuted. Long live the kingdom of beards. Another Twitter user who describes herself as loyal to her guardian, King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Saud, portrayed Raef Badawi as a mercenary of liberalism. In response to his arrest, Amnesty International designated Raef Badawi a political prisoner and called for his immediate release. Moreover, Human Rights Watch said the charges against Badawi were based solely on his peaceful exercise of his right to free expression. Why is the kingdom that claims its support to the call for democracy in the Arab world repressing local human rights activists? Will Saudi Arabia remain firm against the calls for internal reforms? And how would the royal family's second generation act towards freedom of speech?
Mr. Sevag, what's significant about Raef Badawi's arrest? I mean, he's not the first activist in Saudi Arabia to get arrested by the Saudi authorities. What's significant about his own arrest?
I think the main significance of Raef Badawi's arrest is that he clearly represents a very large number of human rights activists, of activists who are charged with these vague charges, whose only call is peaceful, whose only demands are basic human rights, and including freedom of thought and freedom of expression. So Raif is a very good representation of dozens of other activists which we and other international organizations have documented, who have been arrested, detained, charged since the beginning of this year. It's been going on since 2011 and 12, but especially end of 2012 and early 2013. And there are other dimensions to it, how religion is politicized, inserted into legal and human rights affairs, how the Saudi courts operate, the whole legal framework of Saudi Arabia, and basically the overarching or over powerful executive's intervention in all aspects of political and social life in Saudi Arabia, one would say.
Okay, Mr. Sevag, actually, Raif was detained in Jeddah's prison and kept in Jeddah's prison in June 2012, and then he was punished for what they call apostasy, which carries the death penalty. And then later on, we heard that that punishment was dropped for several reasons. In your opinion, what actually took place here? Why was he convicted at the beginning with this high crime, which is a high judgment, if we can say, apostasy, which of course, as we remind our viewers, carries death penalty inside Saudi Arabia? Why was he convicted of that and then taken away from him?
Well, he was actually charged by at least one court or one prosecutor who replaced another prosecutor. So in other words, I think that was, many activists would say that was a clear example of how the executive is intervening in the affairs of the judiciary. So what happened is that he was charged with apostasy. Basically, the prosecution pushed for it. Then another court where his file went disagreed, said that there's no foundation for a charge of apostasy. So it sent it back to the first instance court, where basically he was charged with other things, even further, more vague things, if you could imagine, such as insulting Islam or harming the image of the state and the king, things like that. And that's what he got convicted and sentenced for.
Okay. The Jeddah court then finally sentenced him to 7 years in prison, as we highlighted, of course, in addition to 600 lashes. Here, what are the crimes that were committed by Raif? We can highlight them because we also know that he was convicted of parental disobedience also. The 7 years, do they only include political expression or a certain kind of tweet that he posted on his Twitter? What were they upon?
That's a very good question, because there's no evidence whatsoever to back up these charges. So what are the charges? If you look at the charges, first of all, we have not seen yet the verdict, the document of the verdict from the court. So once we see that, I'm not expecting much from it, but at least we'll know the exact wording of these charges or the sentence. Now, in the case of Raif, he was basically charged for a couple of things.
Yes.
His writings, which were, it's basically writings, expression of his ideas. And his ideas on both Facebook and Twitter, and on his blog or on his forum, the Saudi Liberals. So basically, there was this 5-year dimension and the 2-year dimension, and it seems, these are the first reports that emerged, indicated that 5 years were basically for the website,
yes,
founding the website, urging people to post, and also failing to remove insulting posts. As in, if he was managing the website, that was partly the argument, then he should have not let other people post things that are deemed insulting to the kingdom. So that was the 5 years. The 2 years were about his posts or tweets and Facebook posts.
Yes.
And then there is a 3-month sentence, either within the 7 or in addition to the 7 attached to it, which is basically about disobeying his father. Which is, according again to activists and people who are following his case, it is one of the means that the authorities would use to basically, in Raif's case, to start the whole legal persecution of Raif, or the whole legal case, through the means of his father.
We do understand about the further points that you actually highlighted, but when it comes to parental disobedience, I mean, we rarely hear such a law applied within the Saudi borders. What do you know? What's information that we have about that? I mean, he's not a child; he's an adult, and it's like, why is it applied, and when is it applied? What is it at the beginning? Parental disobedience. We've never heard of that before.
Yes, well, basically in Arabic it's called uquq, which basically is. Again, keep in mind that in Saudi Arabia there are no coded laws, right? There are legal procedures and rules of conducting trials, etc. in some cases, and completely not applied in many cases. But there are no coded laws, as in this law entails that form of punishment, etc., or this violation, this type of punishment. So then it basically is an interpretation of Quranic let's say things coming from the Quran or Sharia or traditions.
So does that mean that this is a law that is found within the laws written in Saudi Arabia? Is this a law that is actually documented?
There are no coded laws. So this is coming from the Quran. This is coming from Islamic traditions. So in other words, given that there are no coded laws, judges in Saudi Arabia tend to interpret the legal traditions, the religious traditions in their own way, and there's no oversight, there's no accountability, so they get away with passing these types of judgments whenever they, and they decide what to do.
Of course, we will speak in depth about how these judgments were created and the interpretation of the verses within the Holy Book of Quran. Here now you would be joining us through the phone, Zonneveld, who is the co-founder of Muslims for Progressive Values from Los Angeles. Hello and welcome, Annie.
Thank you for having me.
Annie, what's the message that Saudi Arabia is trying to actually prevail or send through such method?
I'm really not sure what they are trying to convey, but what we as a Muslim organization have a problem with, the context from which these judgments are passed is supposedly framed on Islam, based on the Quran. But in actuality, it's such a contradictory to the Quran itself, to the principles of Islam itself. When you have verses from the Quran that say, "O humankind, now we have revealed unto you a book that is all about you, so will you not then use your sense, use your reason?" That is verse Quran 21, Surah 21:10. So the actual freedom of expression, freedom to reason, use one's common sense, as Raef Badawi did, and so many activists in Saudi Arabia are doing, is their human right. It is demanded, it is dictated in the Quran, and the fact that they're being punished based on some abstraction is such an insult to Islam. And that is the context from which we, as Muslims for Progressive Values, come from.
Okay, but Annie, again, on the other hand, they say, or even analysts say, that these kind of actions have been taking place, arresting activists, arresting tweeters, arresting tweets, of course, the tweeters that are followed definitely on Twitter. Here, there is a very important point that has been said, because Saudi Arabia is trying as much as they can to control any uprising that might be taken place within the Saudi territories. Is that to an extent believable here and justifying, therefore the Saudi Arabia is justifying these kind of actions because they're trying to protect the national security, as they claim?
Well, that's politics, and what needs to happen is religion needs to be taken out of politics. So, religion does not mix into politics. There needs to be a separation. There needs to be justice in the system. Arresting people based on their political will, that is, let's look at Prophet Muhammad. I'm going to go back to religion because everyone else, I'm assuming, is talking from the secularism, and that's fine. But as a Muslim organization and one that interprets Islam in a progressive form, or we feel that Islam is inherently progressive, we go back to that. And our argument is you cannot use religion to justify, to support, or to empower your political will on others. That is un-Islamic. And you have Prophet Muhammad, who comes from Saudi Arabia, and the will and the way he conducted himself, and the way he, as a political leader, allowed for dissent, allowed for ijtihad and iqlaq. And what happened? what happened to that tradition? Why is Saudi Arabia not following that tradition? And that is the challenge that we have, not just for Saudi Arabia, for all the Muslim nations. That is such a problem in all the Muslim states.
Okay. Mr. Nizar, Badawi actually established his own online platform in year 2008, where he encouraged, let me say, this kind of religious and political dialogue between Saudis. In 2009, authorities inside Saudi Arabia took action. They confiscated his own business, deprived any source of income, and even deprived him from traveling abroad, going outside Saudi Arabia. Did all these factors throughout the year, because it's not that in year 2013 actually Badawi committed or wrote that kind of tweet. His actions been taking place a long time ago, 2008, 2009, up till this moment. Did all these factors pile up and led to the decision that is made by the Saudi authorities today, which is sentencing him to 7 years of prison?
Sure. I mean, there are some actions, some steps. There are, like, if they were intimidating him, trying to get from him to waive any political activity, any opinion which is not conservative, and to stop asking people to debate about Saudi Arabia affairs and so on. And when it was obvious that Badawi is insisting on his freedom, and people who are supporting him are insisting on dealing with his case as a human rights case.
Yes.
I mean, at that moment, the court decided to take action and to sentence him to this very inhuman punishment.
Okay, so therefore here also we can understand that several warnings were issued.
Yes,
but he did not take them in consideration, and he kept on with his own opinion.
Yeah, that's how I understand what happened. That's how we can understand any despotism.
Okay.
Yes.
Definitely, we will be speaking in depth about the law perspective from his arrest. Dear viewers, we will take a first break and be right back.
Women's rights redefined.
Dear viewers, welcome back. Human Rights Report on Saudi Arabia 2013, Women's Rights. Under the discriminatory Saudi guardianship system, girls and women are forbidden from traveling, conducting official business, or undergoing certain medical procedures without permission from their male guardians. When it comes to migrant workers' rights, under the kafala system, many employers confiscate passports, withhold wages, and force migrants to work against their will. When it comes to torture, detainees includes children commonly face systematic violations of due process and fair trial rights, including arbitrary arrest, torture, and ill treatment in detention. Mr. Nizar, of course, I was speaking to Mr. Sevag about the significance of his own arrest. Raef Badawi is not the first man to be arrested. These kind of scenes I've seen a lot inside Saudi Arabia. And again, we ask, what's the aim of Saudi Arabia? Because also Human Rights Watch registered that in the last 3 years, we've actually witnessed an increase in the number of arresting activists basically inside Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, the main target of the law in Saudi Arabia now is to keep society very conservative, to keep the same values, the same rulers, the same regime, and to intimidate any changing force in the society. And Badawi illustrates all this policy. I mean, we saw how he was arrested, how he was charged, how he is sentenced now.
Yes.
So I mean, and what is the accusations? The main accusations that he is calling for debate. I mean, calling for debate about religious figures, about religious.
And how can one actually, Doctor, view the number of arrests, the increase in the number of arrests of these activists in the last 3 years inside Saudi Arabia?
Of course, I mean, it's related.
In what category can that be kept?
It's related somehow to the uprising everywhere in the Arab world. So, I mean, you intimidate people, you take some people, the most known names, I mean, and you charge them and you prosecute them, so everybody else would be intimidated and keep silent.
Yes.
And that's how the despotism is working and is acting, and it's one of illustrations.
Okay, Mr. Sevag, Amnesty considers Raef Badawi as a prisoner of conscience. How many cases similar to Badawi's have Amnesty registered up till this moment? And we were highlighting the HRW said that there is an increase in the number of arrests in the last 3 years inside Saudi Arabia.
Well, I mean, an increase would mean that you have a baseline, you have an understanding of what the numbers were. I mean, that's the first difficulty in Saudi Arabia. These people we know about, Raef Badawi, the main members of ACPRA, the Saudi Civil and Political Association, Muhammad al-Qahtani, Abdullah al-Hamid, Sulaiman al-Rashudi, and I can go on. And basically, these people we know about because they are high-profile activists, because they are in touch with us or people outside of Saudi Arabia. They are known people. But can you imagine then how many hundreds, if not thousands of people have been detained who no one knows about? And that's partly what's going on, for example, in central Saudi Arabia, in the area that's called Buraida. In these places, you have demonstrations.
So you mean that there are prisoners who we don't know anything about, that they've been arrested by the Saudi authorities?
Hundreds, if not thousands, since 2011 specifically. As Nizar was saying, since basically Arab uprising, things have changed slightly.
Okay, so and how come their families, the families of these prisoners that you're speaking about, how come their families don't speak up and say anything about them or even about their own condition?
They do, actually. I mean, a lot of them do, but what you have to basically, there are different factors that make them incapable or unwilling to reach out to groups like Amnesty or lawyers in Saudi Arabia.
Could it possibly be due to threats by the Saudi authorities to join? Because to say the truth, even the sister of Raif or even the lawyer of Raif was supposed to be with us today to join us in cases, but they couldn't make it. They said yes and then they said no, as if there is certain kind of oppression or certain kind of authorities banning them to actually join us.
Absolutely.
Is that the scene here?
Nizar put it also in a very smart way, I think, at the beginning when he said, you know, Raif and others, they start with harassment, they start with intimidation. Then they start basically to gradually see if they can co-opt you. If they are unwilling, if you remain steadfast, then they'll take you to court. Now, that's not necessarily the only track. In some cases, if this person or people, children sometimes, women in other times, if they are not known, if they cannot basically make the same type of noise that these human rights activists can, these are the people that will be disappearing. These are the people that have disappeared. Again, you cannot really have exact numbers. That's the main issue. You don't know what's going on. Basically, there are hundreds who have been arrested. Many were released, and those who were released are unwilling to talk because they're scared. The authorities are telling them, if you talk, we will know about it. And a lot of these trials, Raif and others, basically these activists or people go to the court. The prosecution faces them with piles of printouts or CDs of their tweets, of their Facebook posts. So in other words, the authorities are paying very close attention to what these individuals are saying online. And they're hunting them one by one.
Yes, and they're even threatening their own families too, as we highlighted. Okay. Annie Zonneveld, actually, can we say today that there is a wrong interpretation of wrong interpretation by the authorities, by the Saudi authorities, to the religious terminologies that are used here. Can that be said today, or they're not applying them in the right position?
Yes, correctly. When you were describing the way the oppression against Badawi, Raef Badawi was ramped up, how they took away his business and they started chiseling away his rights. For me, it struck. There was such a parallel to when Islam, the birth of Islam, how the new converts to Islam, how they were oppressed and how economically they were deprived. There was no trade allowed between the new Muslims and the tribe of the day. And so on. It was just so unbelievable how the modus operandi was so similar between the Saudi government and the human rights activists in Saudi Arabia and that of Prophet Muhammad and the new converts. And I just want to put that out so that, you know, this maybe will awaken further the oppression of the Saudi government. But it's not just the Saudi government. So, for example, let's take Hamza Kashgari, who was arrested and turned back in Malaysia, which is my home country, and turned back to Saudi Arabia to be arrested and to be charged with blasphemy for his tweets. So there is inherently something wrong in the way Islam is being used as a tool to oppress
and that's
all
when
human rights in the Muslim country.
Okay, but does that mean that they are actually demolishing the picture of Islam or representing a wrong image of Muslims or even about Islam as a whole? Because of course, when anyone watching and sees that because one expresses his own political opinion, writing a certain tweet, and therefore he becomes arrested and it's like he's sentenced to 7 years and 600 lashes. That's unbelievable. That's pretty much very far away from what Islam asks. Isn't by these actions applied, aren't they actually demolishing the picture of Islam?
Oh, absolutely. As a Muslim living in America, the amount of comments that says, oh, well, Saudi Arabia, that's where Islam was born, and so therefore that must be really Islam.
Yes.
And it is, and our whole and our work goes into countering that idea. Says, no, that is not Islam, because there's this other Islam. Seriously, 25 years ago, Islam is not oppressive the way it is now. We have become so oppressive and so unjust in our interpretation of Islam. It's not just in Saudi Arabia, it's also here in the United States, it's all over the world. And this poison needs to stop. And the vision of Islam being represented by that in Saudi Arabia is a sad story.
Okay. Mr. Nizar, actually Badawi was considered as violating Saudi Arabia's anti-cyber crime law. So this is a certain law that is found within their own penal code. What can you tell us about this law specifically? How was it created and what does it include specifically? Because they have also got, we spoke about the parental disobedience. There is also a law that they can judge people upon parental disobedience. And even Badawi was charged upon three months of imprisonment because due to parental disobedience. And therefore, we've also got the terminology anti-cyber crime law. So as if there are certain laws within the Constitution that speaks about that.
Okay. Let's start by parental obedience. What does that mean?
Disobedience, yes.
That means that they use families in order to keep conservative values.
Okay.
They use families to threat their children, to ask them to obey with what the ruler wants.
By force.
And by any way.
Okay.
And then they consider that as a crime. So they take family as allies to the ruler in order to keep things like they are, to keep things very the same regime, the same values, the same figures everywhere.
Yes.
So I mean, we have to understand it this way. I mean, you cannot hear now. somebody is charged with family disobedience.
Yes.
What does that mean? I mean, it's very conservative.
Especially
rule.
if he's an adult.
It's very conservative. Yes, right. And then I'm not expert of this anti-cyber
crime law.
Cyber crime law, but as is usual in the Arab countries, in the Gulf, mainly Arab countries, I mean, it's about everything that you, if you create a forum, a blog on this sites, which is not complying with the regime rules, I mean, you are subject to punishment.
Okay.
It may be because you are insulting what they call, I mean, insulting Islam or whatever other violation.
Okay.
I mean.
It is said that judges in Saudi Arabia base their own interpretation on definition or even what they understand from the religious laws rather than rather than depending on written legal codes or even penal codes. What does that mean today? I mean, to what extent is that credible, this kind of tactics in dealing with human vital here?
Okay, I mean, when we read the sentence,
because there aren't any certain documents that they can refer to.
Exactly. I mean, they are following the precedent, the Salaf, and what the precedent. I mean, so they are using some punishment which have been done some time ago. I mean, I understand. So it's some kind of common law, very conservative common law, because it's using precedents from many centuries ago. And so, I mean, the problem now is not only with what has been punished, but also with what is the punishment.
Okay.
Because when we are talking about hundreds of lashes, that means that there is a degrading punishment, which is another violation, which another severe punishment, which is unacceptable.
Yes, that's into a category of physical abuse also.
So, I mean, now I think the problem that we are using a disproportionate punishment with what has been done by Badawi. I mean, for any human rights researcher or activist, or I mean, you should never punish this Badawi, because he exercised his freedom of expression, and that's all. And secondly, you don't have the legality of sanctions, and third, you have degrading punishment used by the courts.
Okay.
So all this meant that we are in front of a very unacceptable punishment.
Okay, does the fact that judges base their own legal perspective based on their own interpretation of Islamic words from the Holy Quran, does that mean that they will not give equal judgment to similar people on the same case? For example, if we've got also another person, another activist who expresses his own opinion, will we hear the same number of sentences, the number of years spent in prison, or even the same number of lashes, because there aren't certain documents that they are following and applying their own rules?
Sure, where you don't have clear text saying that this misdoing is punished with this sentence. I mean, you are leaving things to very wide punishment, and also here to selective justice, to some kind of despotism. It's a very hard despotism.
Okay, dear viewers, we will take a final break and be right back.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
Welcome back, dear viewers. Mr. Sevag, have Amnesty tried to get in contact with authorities inside Saudi Arabia, at least to like act as a mediator, or at least to like reduce the number of years that Badawi now is facing?
Well, I mean, if the Saudi authorities pay attention to us, then they would have replied to the hundreds and dozens of requests and letters Amnesty has sent over the years, over the last more than 50 years, actually, almost. We've never been allowed to Saudi Arabia. We ask almost every single year. But the letters that we send on behalf of people like Raef Badawi and other activists, we almost never get replies. Rarely we do. And basically, we are always open. We always want to engage with dialogue. We always want to hear their point of view, the Saudi point of view, but we almost never get that. So in other words, we, other than issuing public statements condemning and describing how these are violations of international law, in some cases Saudi national law, basically going further than that for a dialogue, or even just to be able to express our point of view and have the authorities listen to it, we are facing a huge challenge. It's one of those rare situations that there's no desire to talk to Amnesty.
Okay, how is Amnesty supposed to act considering this kind of tough situation here? Of course, when sending similar documents and similar requests to other countries, at least there is a kind of cooperation from the authorities with Amnesty because it's an international organization. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia, and obviously as you are explaining, it's kind of harder stance and harder position. What does that requires Amnesty? What kind of steps to make, at least, towards such authorities?
Well, I mean, the first thing it does is actually it harms Saudi Arabia itself, because then their point of view is never actually formulated well enough, or they never are seriously engaging with the international law arguments or basic human rights arguments we're making. So they're not really engaging. So there's a huge missing picture. They are ending up looking extremely authoritarian and repressive. So that's the first effect. Then the second, what it does to us is basically it forces us to use other channels.
Yes, such as United Nations mechanisms, special bodies, reporting to them, including the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review. Saudi Arabia's turn is coming in October, including lobbying with allies of Saudi Arabia, which are obviously really large powers in the world. Most of Western Europe the European states are allies of Saudi Arabia. Exactly, and that's what HRW actually moved. HRW urged the EU high representatives and EU member states to actually criticize Saudi authorities and keep certain pressure on them. Is that vital? Is that beneficial?
That's an ongoing debate. The debate that is typically framed as, does silent diplomacy work, or does the public diplomacy work? As in, should these authorities talk silently with the Saudi authorities, or should they go out publicly and condemn and basically condemn the practices of the Saudi authorities? And there's no answer to it. In honestly, I mean, both should be used, but do not seem to have any influence whatsoever on the Saudi authorities. None whatsoever.
Could it be because the pressure that is kept by the UN, as you highlighted when Amnesty sends these documents, or even by the EU, could it be because this kind of pressure is not sufficient, and that's why it's not giving beneficial results spontaneously?
Well, one could argue that they're not sufficient, but then the sufficiency or lack of sufficiency is actually dependent on the types of rights that are given to these bodies, or the types of things that another state could say to another sovereign state. So as long as Saudi Arabia is recognized as a sovereign country, and as long as they get away with these argument for particularity, then there's going to be very limited room to be able to influence them. But that does not mean not talking about these things, because the main problem...
Yes, but also there are certain different kind of pressure, speaking about economy, speaking about mutual interest between allies. That by itself is another tool of practicing pressure on them.
Absolutely. So for one thing, we cannot expect, at least from, let's say, the United States government or any administration in the United States, and I think we cannot expect from most of the European powers who have relationships with the Saudis, at least their executive branches or their rulers, to be able to talk that frankly to the Saudi authorities, to be able to do some sort of lobbying with them. We cannot expect that, because if anything, this factor of oil is key to Western economies. These industrialized states are dependent on oil, have to rely on Saudi Arabia, which for them seems to be as the stable, let's say, oasis in a sea of upheavals, sitting on extremely large oil reserves. So if the Saudi government or regime is unstable, that means the instability is probably going to cause a lot of economic chaos. That's probably going to cause disruption of oil supplies. It's probably going to cause, disorganization of the oil market.
Yes.
So the prices go up. This is going to cause huge economic problems for Western countries. That's one of the factors that is playing a role. Another is obviously political. Saudi Arabia is a moderate, quote unquote, moderate country in the Middle East. Now, if that is moderate, and I'm not sure what is radical exactly, what would be the radical?
Okay.
And so, let's say history and coalition, which dates the Cold War years, is still ongoing, and that's also, and there are other factors that make it difficult for government.
Mr. Nizar, when we stand in front of such a complex situation where authorities refuse to actually cooperate with any NGO around the world, what is the legal move that can be done here in front of such a complex situation?
I mean, if they don't answer or if they don't reply on Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, that means that for them, they don't have the same reference. They esteem themselves as having other reference than a human rights conventions or a human rights ideology or whatever. So it's some kind of expressing their position that we are somewhere else and you don't have to teach us how to deal with issues, and we know how to do. I mean, legal, I mean, I think that now
isolating these countries by their own allies, is that seen as a legal move?
Okay, but I mean, to be realistic, I mean, it's very difficult to isolate Saudi Arabia.
Because of mutual interests.
Yes, I mean, mutual interest and because of the oil problem and all this. But I mean, what is absolutely necessary and is to talk about Badawi's case and about other cases, because this, human rights activists are doing such sacrifices in order to create something new.
Yes,
in
to spread the message.
In the Saudi debate. And to make their cases not only a private case, but a public case, a public case, a worldwide case. I mean, that's absolutely necessary in order to give a meaning to their struggle and to enable them to resist and to continue talking about their values.
Okay, if the only way is through
ideas.
activists, as you are highlighting, and raising awareness, just as what we are doing today here, what can that result to in the end of the day? An uprising within Saudi Arabia that would ban such movements? I
mean, it's absolutely not the job of a human rights activist to prepare for an uprising. I mean, the job of a human rights activist is to remind Saudi Arabia that it's part of this world. That, I mean, there are some values which should be granted to all individuals and respected, and to make Saudi Arabia part of the debate, of the worldwide debate about freedom of expression. There is no oasis, I mean, living aside with having its own values and oppressing his citizens and so on. No, I mean, it's part of the world, and I mean, and we feel somehow that those people who are trying to create something new in Saudi Arabia are doing this for the sake of humanity also. Okay,
King Abdullah have received praise for dialogue several times between religions and expressing opinion, but how is that possible when the Saudi authorities' tolerance is few when it comes, of course, crossing the Saudi borders? How can that be seen?
I mean, who gave this prize? I mean, certainly not Amnesty International, certainly not Human Rights Watch. I mean, this prize was given for economic interest, and we have to blame those who did that. I mean, sure, I mean...
And therefore, of course, keeping more pressure on them to actually act. If they're the ones that hold the keys, at least. Mr. Sevag, Amnesty have sent members to actually see if Badawi is subjected to certain kind of harsh interrogation, at least?
We would love to. We wrote a letter in July 2012 with 5 or 6 other large international and regional human rights organizations asking at the time to attend the trials, ongoing trials, including of those who ended up in prison, Hamid and Haddani. We never got a response. We never got a reply. We do know that there's a lot of torture and treatment through the prisons. There has been unverified reports of unannounced executions. Imagine unannounced executions in prisons. So it's extrajudicial killings. There are reports of enforced disappearances. So basically, when we write to say we want to come and do human rights research, we want to talk to families of detainees, we don't get a response. The best thing we would get is that your letter is being studied, we will get back to you, and almost never we get a reply. So on these particular issues, visiting prisons or doing human rights research in Saudi Arabia, we have never ever been responded to, and we will never, I think, as long as the factors, political, economic, and other factors do not change, we won't. But we will obviously keep on trying.
Okay, so there is a chance anyhow, that Badawi is subjected to certain kind of harsh interrogation. If the press is not able to know anything about it, and if Amnesty is not able to send members through the prison and through the cell.
Absolutely, and again, keep in mind what I said earlier, that we know Raef Badawi. He can get messages out, he can talk to family, and we can reach basically what he has said. He has a lawyer. Now, the vast majority of detainees in Saudi Arabia do not have lawyers. Basically, almost no one other than close family members know about them, including, by the way, such as these activists have been ill-treated as well. There is the case of Muhammad al-Bajadi. He was basically, for 9 months, his family didn't know where he was, didn't know if he was alive or dead. He was in prison.
Okay.
He was denied, he was kept in solitary confinement.
Okay.
He was basically ill-treated in many ways. Although the Saudi regime, it seems, the prison authorities are learning gradually that in some cases, or some people, you do not torture the way you torture others.
Okay. Annie Zonneveld, as a co-founder of Muslims for Progressive Values, what are the steps that your organization is making in order to help Badawi? Of course, now his lawyer would appeal the verdict. But what are the steps that you are making?
Yeah, the thing, I'd like to first address some of the, we were talking about economic powers and the wealth of Saudi Arabia and how the economic effects of pressuring Saudi Arabia towards a more just system. But what we're not talking about is the power of Saudi Arabia when it comes to the Islamic world. The fact that there are quotas for Muslim nations to how many they can send their citizens to Mecca for Hajj, that is also a powerful position to be in. And they use that. And so the only way that we as Muslim state nations can really change toward a just system is for us to boycott Saudi and not go to Hajj.
Yes.
But of course, that idea is too radical for most Muslims. They would rather go and cleanse their own sins than really support the just system or the unjust system that is right now in Saudi Arabia. So that's a problem with the OIC and all that whole network. As far as what we can and cannot do, there's not much we as a grassroots organization can do, but the only thing that we are providing is we are that alternative voice that all these nation states are afraid to say. We are not afraid to say the truth. We are not afraid to speak up for justice in the context of Islam. And that is what we have been able to do, and that is what we've been doing, regardless whether
so therefore, such actions by the Saudi authorities will not stop more activists expressing their own opinion in the coming future.
Absolutely not. And I think what we are doing is we are using, just as Saudi Arabia is using the Quran to justify oppression and unjust system, we are using the Quran to do just the opposite. And we are using that to empower other human rights, other Muslims. Says, look, this is what Islam really is. Read and learn it for yourself and then use it to empower yourself. And that is what we feel is our role.
Okay, Aly Sleem, co-founder of Muslims for Progressive Values, joining us from Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us in Cases. Mr. Sevag, Amnesty called readers of the article of Badawi to act by adding a tweet or even a message or even by posting their own opinion about the case, of course, to call for his release, an unconditional release, if we can say, an immediate and unconditional release. How many tweets have you gathered up till this moment?
Well, I think what you're referring to was tweet action that gathered a couple of thousand around 6 weeks ago, actually. There was a decision at one point to pick Raef Badawi for different reasons and work on his case, hoping that with the coming of Ramadan and other factors, we would be able to basically get some form of a momentum and hopefully a release of some sort behind them. So that was actually before the verdict. I personally was not expecting the verdict to be, first of all,
does that require a similar action if the verdict is now out and this action was made 6 weeks ago? Does that mean that Amnesty will use similar actions in order to save Badawi, or at least to call for less years of imprisonment?
Well, I mean, we will continue to call basically call him a prisoner of conscience, and we will continue to call for his immediate and unconditional release. How we do that, be that Twitter, or be that in the old-fashioned way of writing letters, or be that in lobbying actions which are ongoing in different ways, or be that through reports submitted to different bodies or organizations or authorities or regional powers, all of those, there are multiple options of advocacy and campaigning that we use and we rely on. And we use those for human rights.
Okay, Mr. Nizar, a final question to you. When Saudi Arabia is committing such actions, and throughout the years we've seen this factor increasing year after year, where would that keep it in front of international community today? At times where Saudi Arabia specifically is calling for revolutions in other countries and is calling for democracy in the Middle East.
Showing some contradictions, some hypocrisy in the policy of the state. And of course, I mean...
And losing credibility of the words that they're saying.
Yeah, but I mean, the main thing is how to show everywhere this contradiction in the discourse of the Saudi government.
Exactly.
So the Saudi government would feel that they have to do something in order to stop this contradiction. They feel that they are embarrassed and they cannot continue in this kind of contradiction and hypocrisy. I think the solution is a long-term work. I mean, long-term. Talking about this, making of it a problem, a worldwide problem. And I think that the most important thing, what would happen inside the Saudi Arabian society.
Okay, definitely his lawyer would actually appeal the charges. We will be looking at that and hoping for the better. Thank you very much, Mr. Nizar Saghiyeh, human rights activist and co-founder of Legal Agenda. We've also joined us from London, Sevag Keshishian, KSA researcher at Amnesty International. Thank you very much for joining us. Dear viewers, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for watching, and whenever those are persecuted, that place we tackle case by case. Thank you again.